fate as the Indian Air Force bombed their supply lines. Some Pakistani outposts subsisted on spoons of sugar for the last few days. But India's armed forces overcame far greater challenges as they fought the invaders in the world's most terrain. My name is Kabir Bedi, and today on Guns and Glory, we continue with the war in Kargil. As the Indian Army and Air Force began operations in Kargil, the chief of the Pakistani Army, General Pervez Musharraf, went on an official visit to China. Between May 26th and May 29th, 1999, he had several conversations over the phone with his trusted Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Muhammad Aziz. In one of them, General Aziz reported about a meeting chaired by Nawaz Sharif, at which the chiefs of the Pakistan Air Force and Navy complained to Sharif that Musharraf had kept them in the dark about the invasion of the Kargil heights.
इस सारे ऑपरेशन की कामयाबी की बुनियादी वजह यही है कि इन्होंने लोगों को नहीं बताया। अगर ये बताया जाता तो हमारा तजर्बा ये कहता है जैसे पहले सारी कोशिशें नाकाम होती रही, ये भी नाकाम हो जाती।
This telephone conversation was intercepted by RAW, India's intelligence agency, and made public. The transcripts were distributed to foreign embassies in Delhi. At once the world knew that from the beginning, Kargil had unquestionably been an operation of the Pakistan Army.
ठीक पीछे पाकिस्तानी घुसपैठी है।
वहां से घुसपैठियों को हटाकर सेना के लिए एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती है।
पाकिस्तानी सैनिक।
The Kargil war was extensively covered on the ground by both the Indian as well as foreign electronic media. The government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee effectively used the media to convey to the world the level of duplicity that Pakistan was practicing.
Access was given to the Indian media by the Vajpayee government, but the focus of the Vajpayee government really was, on the body bags, because they wanted to whip up this passion and frenzy.
On the battleground, proof was there to see that those on top of the Kargil heights were no Mujahideen infiltrators, as claimed, but regular Pakistan Army units following commands issued by their Rawalpindi headquarters. Each deadly thrust up the treacherous terrain of Kargil by the Indian Army was broadcast for the nation to see.
मेरे ठीक सामने उस पहाड़ी पर घुसपैठियों ने कब्जा जमा रखा है।
शनिवार 7:45 बजे है और भारतीय सेना ने
For the first time, Indians saw their heroes in action and realized that they too were mortal men of flesh and blood, and it was only a brave death that anointed them with immortality.
The people who won the Kargil war for us were really the junior officers and the mid-level officers. I would say even the senior leadership failed because they kept touting the official line that, it was some rats have come in, we'll be able to clear them in 48 hours. As we know, the war went on for over 2 months.
The final assault to capture point 5140 began from different directions. 3 battalions, 1 each from the Garhwal Rifles, Jammu and Kashmir Rifles, and the Naga Regiment were given the task of evicting the Pakistanis. Captain Vikram Batra of the 13 JAK Rifles and his Delta Company were among those tasked with recapturing point 5140. Nicknamed Sher Shah for his unstinting courage, Captain Batra decided to attack from the rear to surprise the enemy.
Vikram Batra's company and another company, Bravo Company and Delta Company, was supposed to go through and climb a vertical cliff face to point, this 5140, which was the most dominating height in that area. From there they could see for miles around. And tackling that was not a joke. They finally assaulted it from the cliff face. They actually crawled up the cliff, and the Pakistanis were so surprised They never expected an assault from the side. They were firing from the direction of the gentler slope, this relatively gentler slope where they thought they would come up from. And the entire Pakistan, there was a fierce hand-to-hand fighting there. The entire Pakistani garrison was either killed, most of them fell to their deaths from that steep height in trying to get away.
Inspired by the extraordinary courage of Captain Batra, the 13 JAK rifles charged the enemy position and captured point 5140 at 3:30 in the morning on June 20th, 1999.
Once we took the Pakistanis off this, thereafter it was, the turning point of that war. It was the turning point of that war. They could not, their artillery observation post officers could not then bombard our lines of communication.
The capture of point 5140 set in motion a string of successes like point 5100, point 4700, Junction Peak and 3 Pimples. Captain Batra led his men to even more glorious victories with the recapture of point 4750 and point 4875.
One of their boys was hit badly and he was lying in the open and he was crying, "Somebody get me, somebody help me." So one of the JCOs of Vikram Singh, he said, "Sir, I'll get him." Vikram laid a hand on his shoulder and he said, "Tu baal bachedar hai, main shara hu. You are married, look, I have nobody behind me." He went to get that boy out. He dragged him out, and as he had almost brought him to safety, that is the time the Pakistani sniper shot him through his chest.
In the early hours of 7th July 1999, Captain Batra fell in battle while rescuing an injured officer during an enemy counterattack. He was awarded the nation's highest honor for gallantry, the Paramveer Chakra.
Pakistan had thought that the scare of a nuclear war would force the Western powers to intervene. More importantly, Pakistan wanted Kargil to be linked to the bigger issue of Kashmir. But for once it seemed no one was ready to listen to Pakistan. The international community realized that Pakistan was playing a dangerous game, and even Pakistan's traditional allies, Turkey, the OIC, and even China, did not come out in support of Pakistan. In fact, Kargil bust the myth of an all-weather relationship existing between China and Pakistan.
The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, had been trying to get America to come out in support. The Pakistan Foreign Ministry kept up a constant litany of how India was violating the sanctity of the LOC.
In my lifetime.
But on June 15th, President Bill Clinton urged Nawaz Sharif to pull his troops out of Kargil. In the same statement, President Clinton praised India's restraint in keeping the war localized.
The same United States of America, which wasn't looking at this region till 1998 when we went nuclear, had already started contacting the Vajpayee government.
On June 17th, the Prime Minister's security advisor, Brajesh Mishra, went to Geneva to meet the G8 leaders and brief them about Kargil. He also handed over a letter from the Indian Prime Minister for the US President. The letter warned that India's patience was running thin and, if required, India would be forced to cross the LOC and take the war to Pakistan.
The decision not to cross the line of control, it had lots of pros and cons, and there are lots of people who felt we should have retaliated across the LC. But when we did not retaliate across the LC and we focused the fighting there, the world lost the casus belli to intervene in this conflict. They could not intervene, and we took 2.5 months, but we methodically sorted them out.
India's Vajpayee took the stand that we will not violate the line of control and we will not cross the line of control, and a lot of that was done in conjunction with the US.
Right from the beginning of the conflict, India had been very clear that it would respond with force. But many measures were taken to deter Pakistan from escalating the conflict into a full-scale war. On May the 20th, even before Indian action on the ground began, the Indian Navy was put on full alert. Naval and Coast Guard aircraft began a continuous surveillance along the western coast.
A lot of ships of the Eastern Fleet were brought to the Western Fleet. They sailed out, almost readied themselves to more or less carry out a blockade of, ready to carry out a blockade of Pakistan. You know, choke their harbours at Karachi and elsewhere. And the Pakistanis were shaken. You see, they had never expected this response. They felt it would be confined to the Kargil heights. Local infantry action, then they found air power brought in, then they found the navy deployed. You see, that is what shook them up.
Amphibious forces of the Indian Navy from the Andaman Islands in the east were moved to the western seaboard. As the exercise shifted westwards, Pakistan moved all its major warships out of Karachi. It also had to escort oil tankers from the Gulf, anticipating attacks or a blockade by Indian ships, which limited their supplies. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif later disclosed that at the time, Pakistan had just 6 days of fuel to sustain itself if a full-fledged war had broken out. While the Navy kept a watch on the sea, the fighting in the mountains intensified. But the all-important Tiger Hill still remained in Pakistani hands.
Tiger Hill stands 16,700 feet high, overlooking Dras. It is a massive feature, almost 1 kilometer wide at its base, and was formidably defended by the Pakistanis. The Pakistani Northern Light Infantry had taken positions on top of Tiger Hill, as well as on the high ridge that ran to its west. Several peaks south of Tiger Hill had also been occupied by the Pakistani soldiers, and these provided observation points of the surrounding valleys and ridgelines. Point 4460, a kilometer south of Tiger Hill, was within supporting range of the NLI's artillery mounted on Tiger Hill. The Tingle Nala divided the complex, and Hill 4875 and Point 4540 stood opposite Tiger Hill. The Pakistanis defending Tiger Hill and the Western Ridge had moved in heavy ammunition to create an engagement area with interlocking fire from multiple sides. An anti-personnel minefield also blocked the approach from Point 4540. A 12.7mm gun atop Trig Hill, a peak 2 kilometers northwest of Tiger Hill, provided the Pakistanis additional heavy weapon support. Their artillery battery on Point 4388 fired into the engagement area as well. The Indian Army faced a nearly impossible task in recapturing Tiger Hill. India had captured Point 4460 in late May, and this provided a base to direct fire onto Tiger Hill. In order to conserve manpower, Pakistan's Northern Light Infantry abandoned Point 4540. Both these positions were to prove critical for India in mounting attacks on the Tiger Hill complex.
Given the urgency, unacclimatized and poorly equipped soldiers of the 1 Naga and the 8th Sikh were sent to assault Tiger Hill. Murderous crossfire from the Pakistani positions inflicted heavy casualties on the Indian soldiers, and the assaults failed. The units surrounded Tiger Hill and dug in to wait. The Pakistan NLI launched counterattacks, but they lacked the numbers to push the Indian battalions off the hill. NLI soldiers even resorted to rolling boulders downhill onto the Indian forces. And then the Indian bombings began.
As India's massive bombardment began, it stretched the Pakistani positions to the limit. India continued pounding the forward slopes of Tiger Hill and the ridge, with as many as 1,200 rounds exploding every 5 minutes. The Indian Army found an undefended flank on the east, and through this, they launched their attack on Tiger Hilltop. At the same time, a small raiding party penetrated Pakistan's line of defense on the western ridge. 25 soldiers of the 18 Grenadiers were ordered to advance and capture Tiger Hill. After scaling the rocks for 3 nights, they were just 50 meters below Tiger Hill when a stone slipped, giving away their position.
Seeing this, the enemy opened up heavy machine gun, grenade and rocket fire, and in hand-to-hand fight, the team leader Havaldar Madan Lal and 5 soldiers got killed.
But 7 soldiers who were near the Pakistani bunkers could neither advance nor retreat. One of them was Grenadier Yogendra Singh Yadav.
Sensing the gravity of the situation, Yogendra Yadav wanted to silence the automatic fire of enemy machine gun which was coming from a bunker by throwing a grenade inside it. He mustered up his courage, crawled up to the bunker and lobbed grenades inside the machine gun bunker and killing 4 Pakistanis in it.
Yogendra Singh sustained 15 bullet injuries and was the sole survivor of the 7 soldiers of the 18th Grenadiers who stayed on to fight the Pakistanis.
यहाँ पैर में हाथ में गोली मारी, लास्ट में उसने यहाँ पे गोली मारी। तो 3 दिन तो हो गए थे पहाड़ी में चलते चलते, पूरी पैंट फट चुकी थी पीछे से। तो पर्स रखा हुआ था यहाँ पर, पर्स में कुदरती तौर पर जो है गिलट के 5-5 रुपए के कई सिक्के थे। जब उसने गोली मारी तो वो सिक्के पे लगी तो रिकोचिट होगी गोली, तो मुझे एहसास लगा कि मैं मर गया। जब उसका दूसरा जवान बंदा साथी जो हमारे साथ पास आया वेपन उठाने के लिए, उसने मेरा AK-47 उठाया और वापस मुड़ा, तो मेरी एकदम आंखें खुली ऐसे जैसे नींद से जगा हूँ। अंदर से एक आया कि अब यार अभी तक नहीं मरा तो मरेगा भी नहीं। मैंने अपना एक ग्रेनेड निकाला और उसके ऊपर ऐसे थूक दिया।
The injured Grenadier Yadav single-handedly kept on fighting and before falling unconscious passed on a vital piece of information. The Pakistanis were about to retreat. For his bravery, Yogendra Singh Yadav was awarded the Paramveer Chakra. The Pakistani forces had been split in 2. They desperately tried to counterattack to join their lines. On July 8th, facing near certain defeat, the NLI abandoned Tiger Hill, leaving all their dead behind.
While most of the Kargil war was fought around Kargil, there was one battle which was fought on the Siachen Glacier. Pakistan's NLI had occupied the Balal post, 19,000 feet high, the highest point that divides Indian and Pakistani positions in Siachen, a height where soldiers have to fight for every breath. In an amazing feat of mountaineering, 48 heroic men of the Indian Army climbed 1,800 feet of near vertical rock face to surprise the Pakistanis and recapture Balal post on June the 27th, 1999. Such is the grit of the Indian soldier. But for the Kargil war to end, Nawaz Sharif had to rush to Washington.
On June 27th, Pakistan's army chief announced at a press conference that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif would shortly be leaving for Washington to meet President Bill Clinton to find a solution to the Kargil crisis. At that time, Nawaz Sharif was in Beijing, meeting the leaders of China. On June 28th, he abruptly ended his China visit and returned to Pakistan. In Washington, President Clinton changed the dates of his planned vacation to meet Nawaz Sharif. The US had even pushed for Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee to travel to Washington, but Vajpayee refused. Bill Clinton met Nawaz Sharif on July the 4th. Behind the scenes, Pakistani and US officials sat across the table to hammer out the exact wording for the declaration that would follow. Bill Clinton's National Security Advisor, Samuel Berger, constantly discussed the wording with Vajpayee's security advisor, Rajesh Mishra, in Washington. In Delhi, Prime Minister Vajpayee waited for President Clinton to call and tell him that Pakistan would withdraw its remaining troops with immediate effect. By July 11th, the remaining units of the Northern Light Infantry began pulling back across the LOC as Indian bombardment continued. And Indian troops recaptured key peaks in the Batalik sector. India set a deadline of July 16th for all Pakistanis to return to their side of the line of control. On July the 12th, Nawaz Sharif went on television to explain to his people why Pakistan was retreating from Kargil. The war in Kargil officially ended on 26 July, but it had far-reaching consequences for the future. Kargil was the beginning of a tussle between Pervez Musharraf and Nawaz Sharif that resulted in Sharif being ousted in a military coup and Musharraf taking over as dictator. Today, the wheel has turned again, with Nawaz Sharif back in power and Musharraf being tried for treason. India learnt many lessons from Kargil. It ushered in long-term changes in the army's deployment and response strategy along the line of control. As the economy boomed, defense spending kept going up year after year. Kargil also made the Bofors guns legendary. And in Kargil, the Indian Air Force wrote the instruction manual for high-altitude air warfare. But war is war. And where there are guns and glory, there is also terrible death and suffering. We end this series with the idealistic hope that there are no more wars and that glory not depend on the barrel of a gun.
The rulers of the United Arab Emirates have insane amounts of money to spend. Thanks to everyone's thirst for oil, they've been on a construction spree unlike any the world has ever seen for such a small country, investing in one ambitious infrastructure project after another. At one point, 24% of all the world's construction cranes were in Dubai. Unfortunately, that was before the 2008 global financial meltdown, which led to much of the investment in the city drying up faster than the water on somebody who just got out of the pool at the Burj Khalifa. But the government insists that many of these projects have simply been delayed and are putting their money where their mouth is with the recent approval of a $32 billion expansion of Dubai's Al Maktoum International Airport that will break ground by the end of 2014. When complete, it'll suddenly have the capacity to become the busiest airport in the world in both total passengers at 220 million a year and total cargo of 12 million annual tons of goods that can move through it. That's almost 3 times more than what takes off from the runways of the world's current leading airport, Hong Kong International. Dubai's terminals will be able to greet 100 of the massive new Airbus A380s at a time. Those things are 2/3 of a football field long and cost $300 million a pop. And the UAE's Emirates airline already owns more of those planes than anyone else in the world. It's the largest airline in the Middle East and will eventually move into the Al Maktoum to help jumpstart activity there. The government's plan is for the airfield to be the heartbeat of a city within the larger city of Dubai. This littler city is called World Central, which the UAE thinks will be home to around 900,000 residents in the near future. The airport also aims to be the central hub for the emerging Middle East, North African, and South Asian economic bloc known as MENASA. But time will tell whether the Sheikh's vision for Dubai actually becomes a reality or fades like some vicious mirage. This is Songdo International Business District, the world's most futuristic urban area. It's being built 40 miles southwest of the second most populated city in the world, Seoul, South Korea. The $40 billion project is along the waterfront in the city of Incheon and is embracing 2 key concepts that urban planners are in love with: The first is Aerotropolis, which means the airport is integrated into the urban center instead of banishing it far outside of the city. This allows for shorter trips to and from the place that's going to get you out of town. This will be an emerging pattern in 21st century planning as air travel continues to become accessible to more and more people in our increasingly interconnected world. Songdo is brilliantly directly connected to the airport via the 7-mile-long Incheon Bridge, so you've just got a straight shot that gets you there in like 10 minutes. That's also got these incredible views, which is the first thing visitors see coming into the city. The other key theme is Ubiquitous City, which is a uniquely Korean concept where every device, component, service is linked to an informational network through wireless computing technology, allowing for greater coordination and a more efficient and synchronized city than has ever been possible before. An example of this is Songdo's trash system, which won't rely on garbage trucks because a network of tubes will suck in the garbage straight from the can and through a system of pipes transport it efficiently to treatment facilities. Songdo's so dedicated to being a model for sustainability that it's set aside 40% of its land area to be outdoor spaces like parks, and it'll become the first city in the world outside of the United States to achieve LEED certification, which is the highest energy consumption and waste standards possible with currently available technology. As a tip of the hat to other great cities, Songdo will also incorporate replicas of New York's Central Park and Venice's historic canals. Overall, construction is currently half done. It already has 67,000 people living there, studying and working at its many schools, including the foreign campuses of 4 American universities. But it's struggled to attract Korean businesses, as the government is refusing to give tax incentives for relocation because that would create an unfair playing field, favoring Songdo over other cities in the country. Still, if it stays squarely focused on the future, Songdo is a long-term investment that's likely to pay off. Nicaragua is about to embark on what may be the riskiest mega project in the world, one that will change it forever. It's going to build the biggest canal on the planet. The $50 billion Nicaragua Grand Canal will cut the country in half to connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific, running through the biggest lake in Central America. At 173 miles long, it'll dwarf the 120-mile-long Suez Canal in Egypt, and directly compete with the Panama Canal 250 miles to the south, through which more than 15,000 ships already pass each year. But in the coming years, many more ships full of goods and raw materials are going to try and pass back and forth from the Pacific to the Atlantic to connect Europe, Brazil, and the eastern coast of the United States with China and the rest of Asia. The story of how little 6 million man Nicaragua, the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, is able to afford such an expensive project is a fascinating case study of globalization and how capitalism is increasingly driving geopolitical decision-making. In June of last year, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega's Sandinista party also controlled parliament and, without any real debate, gave a 50-year no-bid contract to Chinese telecommunications magnate Wang Jing to build and manage the proposed canal. And it just so happens that, also last year, according to a report in the LA Times, Wang hosted a number of Nicaraguan officials and businessmen on a trip to China, where the powerful and connected Wang supposedly flaunted his extreme wealth and was accompanied at all times by Chinese military officers and other high-ranking governmental officials. So it's tough to believe him when he insists that the Chinese government is not financially backing the project, especially when we already know that China is using state-financed companies to buy more and more assets in the West. The opportunity to own the world's most valuable shipping lane seems too tempting for the Chinese government to pass up. The supposedly democratic government of Nicaragua is using a page out of China's playbook by refusing to release any of the studies about the impacts of the canal until December 2014, the same month construction will begin. That's because there's a long list of environmental and humanitarian concerns. The project will tear through countless ecosystems and communities and rip into the source of much of the country's freshwater, Lake Nicaragua. The residents whose land is on the canal route have received no word on what the government plans to do for them in terms of compensation and relocation. But as easy as it is to criticize the way the project is being handled, it's also fairly hypocritical of me, as an American, to mount a very convincing argument against the plan. After all, about 100 years ago, US President Theodore Roosevelt basically took control of Panama and pushed through the canal there, a project that's benefited America time and time again, and has made Panama economically better off in the long run. But we're not living in 1914. Now is the time of social media-fueled revolution, where images and video fly around the world instantly, empowering even the poorest locals to use the power of the global community to rally support for their cause and exert political pressure in unpredictable ways. So what I'm saying is that it may have been easy for President Ortega to see all that money flying around and secretly, single-handedly, approve a massively disruptful project like this. But when those bulldozers start tearing apart the countryside and people's homes, there's probably going to be hell to pay for not consulting the voters at all. This could be shaping up to be another one of those important moments of struggle in world history between the powerful haves and the have-nots. On the one hand, you have the limitless funding of the Chinese who want that flag in the dirt statement-making moment for their country of staking a claim in the Americas. We know the canal would benefit corporations in the West through the shipping and trade benefits I outlined earlier. And with construction set to begin in Nicaragua next month, there doesn't seem to be any stopping it from starting. But on the other hand, this thing is going to take 6 years at a minimum to finish. And if we've learned anything from recent history, it's that a lot can happen in 6 weeks or 6 months, let alone 6 years. On a person-to-person basis, the United Arab Emirates has the biggest ecological footprint in the world, thanks to its prolific oil production and the massive construction boom that's been going on there for the last decade. So it's surprising to learn that the UAE is home to Masdar, the world's first zero-carbon, zero-waste city. To meet this ambitious goal, it's powered only by renewable energy, like a 54-acre, 88,000-panel solar farm beyond the city's walls. That's right, I said walls. The designers studied ancient cities to learn the most effective planning methods to reduce energy consumption. One of the key things they found are that walls help to keep the high, hot desert winds away from cities' inhabitants. They also raised the entire foundation of the site a few feet above the surrounding land to keep Masdar cooler and spaced the buildings much closer together to keep the streets and walkways narrow and mostly in the shade. These techniques, combined with 130-foot-tall wind towers that suck air from above and convert it into a cool breeze blowing on the street, mean Masdar is a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit when just a few meters away the thermostat rises well above 100. Plus, there's no driving in the city, and any car that enters is parked at the outskirts. A system of driverless electric vehicles then ferry people from place to place underground, and a light rail system is also available above ground, which means there's no need for streets. And in a move that cuts both water and electricity consumption more than half, there are no light switches or water taps. Everything is controlled by movement sensors. This unprecedented level of environmental consciousness has won it hard-earned endorsements from environmental conservation groups like Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund. The German engineering giant Siemens has located its Middle East headquarters there, as has the International Renewable Energy Agency. The Masdar Institute for Science and Technology, a small postgraduate university that was founded through a collaboration with MIT, occupies one of Masdar's first completed buildings, and is already producing great work and first-class researchers. So the city undeniably has a solid foundation, but it's got a lot to do still if it's going to meet its ambitious goal of housing 50,000 residents and hosting offices for 60,000 more commuters. The city's co-founder admits that Masdar is, quote, a fraction of what it was supposed to be back in 2006 when we announced it. At the beginning of the project, nobody really anticipated how difficult it is to build a city, end quote. This underscores the point many urban planners around the world have made, that we should be focused on making our existing cities more sustainable instead of building brand new ones. But even if Masdar only teaches us one or two major things about what's possible when it comes to sustainable urban design, and it does seem like it's already done that, then it'll have been worth it, even if it takes much longer to achieve its overall vision, or if it ultimately fails. Because let's be honest, the UAE was going to spend that $20 billion in oil revenue on something, so it's better for everyone that it's going to an important experiment like Masdar rather than another row of gold and marble-crusted hotel skyscrapers or an electricity-sucking indoor snow park. This is the future, maglev trains. Japan's all aboard. They're spending a staggering $85 billion over the next 30 years to connect the island's 3 largest cities, Tokyo to Nagoya to Osaka. That's over 300 miles that you'll be able to cover in about 67 minutes by racing through the countryside at over 300 miles per hour. Maglev technology uses powerful magnetic charges to move rail cars that float several inches above a concrete guideway, rather than riding on steel wheels. This frictionless system allows for a smoother ride at significantly higher speeds than traditional high-speed rail. In contrast, California's planned high-speed rail system that'll eventually connect San Francisco, LA, and San Diego will only be able to travel at top speeds of 220 miles per hour, but its estimated overall cost is $10 billion less than the Japanese system and will cover a distance 2.5 times as long. The Chinese city of Shanghai has had a short maglev line in operation since 2004, but the Japanese line is the world's first intercity link to gain public approval. The project's called Chuo Shinkansen, or as the Japanese refer to it, Rinia Motaka, and is a culmination of 40 years of Japanese maglev development that began with an unlikely partnership between Japan Airlines and Japanese National Railways. What's really impressive about this project is that JR Central, the company that's building the line, will finance the project without public money, thanks largely to the success of the bullet train it's run from Tokyo to Osaka since the mid-1960s. The company's also pushing hard to construct a maglev line between the American capital city of Washington, D.C. and New York, which would showcase the technology to the American market and the rest of the Western world. The Japanese government has even offered to fully finance the 40-mile first leg of the US project from Baltimore to DC, a proposal Prime Minister Shinzo Abe directly pitched to President Barack Obama during a meeting last year. But critics of maglev say the costs outweigh the benefits. Opponents have raised questions about the sheer monetary cost of the project, its environmental impact, and whether it's really needed at all. Tunnels will be blasted through some of Japan's highest mountains to build the Chuo Shinkansen line. But, regardless of what the critics say, something had to change. When the maglev system is done, it will help alleviate the overcrowding on Japan's existing rail system and make it feasible for commuters into Tokyo to live further outside of the city than they can now. Many of the projects that we've profiled in our Mega Project series have a real purpose for advancing society, or at least meeting the needs of a growing world economy. Then there's Azerbaijan's ridiculous Khazar Islands, a project that, despite all the progress in the world, is the perfect example of everything that's still wrong with its power structure, but more on that in a moment. The creatively named Azerbaijan Tower will be the world's tallest building, about 800 feet taller than the current leader, the Burj Khalifa, and insanely twice as tall as the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, New York's One World Trade Center. The Freudian showpiece of the $100 billion project, Azerbaijan Tower, will rise above the capital city, Baku, and it'll be surrounded by 55 artificial islands built in the Caspian Sea, with land gathered by completely destroying a nearby mountain. There will also be at least 8 hotels, a Formula One racetrack, a yacht club, and an airport. So basically, we're talking about Donald Trump's fantasy. Now, it's one thing to build an over-the-top city like Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, which is one of the most developed places in the world, and a completely different thing for it to rise in Azerbaijan, which has a per capita GDP that's not even 1/5 as much as the UAE. This madness is the brainchild of the billionaire developer Ibrahim Ibrahimov, who has extremely close ties with the corrupt government of the newly oil-rich nation of Azerbaijan. Just how corrupt is Azerbaijan? In a 2012 report by watchdog Transparency International that declared 2/3 of the world's countries highly corrupt, Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, stood out from the pack as the report's infamous Person of the Year, with untold amounts of money stashed in various locations around the world. But back to President Aliyev's good buddy, Ibrahimov, who lazily came up with the tacky idea for the mega project that's basically a copy of Dubai's island development and mega tower while on a flight home from, you guessed it, Dubai. He argues that Khazar Islands will be home to 800,000 people, but doesn't explain how those people will afford its expensive apartments. Instead of investing in the future by maybe funding a network of world-class universities, which Azerbaijan isn't even close to having, in a country that borders no ocean and produces no product that the rest of the world wants, besides oil, the government thinks it's a good idea to build this. I doubt many of the 9 million people of Azerbaijan think it's a very good idea. In fact, in a possible sign of things to come, last year, Azerbaijanis, in a city across the country, got so fed up with the corrupt regime, they rioted for 2 entire days. But look, the capital is doing some things right. Baku made Lonely Planet's top 10 ranking of the best nightlife spots in the world. I just wonder how much they paid to get on that list. No list of mega projects would be complete without including the largest ever science project. The International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER, is a collaboration between China, the European Union, India, Japan, Russia, South Korea, and the United States that is under construction in southern France, where researchers will attempt to see if they can, essentially, recreate the power of the sun and harness it in a steel bottle. Gas will be heated to over 150 million degrees in a massive steel frame using giant magnets that will force some atoms together. In this experimental reactor, the hope is to produce 10 times more energy than what is used to initiate the reaction, or the equivalent of 500 megawatts of power for 1,000 seconds. Although electricity won't be generated at the ITER facility, a fusion plant based on this design would use the heat generated to drive turbines and produce power. Unlike nuclear fission, which are what all nuclear power plants are today, fusion reactors should be completely safe, with no risk of producing a runaway chain reaction and no dangerous long-living radioactive waste. The fact that nations who are competing in nearly every area of geopolitics and economics are coming together to collaborate on a $50 billion project is a sign that the science is incredibly promising and the potential benefits to humanity are profoundly game-changing. That's why countries that represent half the world's population and account for 2/3 of the global economy are participating, because solving fusion would mean prosperity for all, the closest thing to limitless energy we can fathom. This month, after the completion of the ground support structure, which took 4 years to finish, the second phase of construction began, the walls of the 7-story building where the experiment will take place. But we're still several years away from turning the thing on. The complex will make its first attempt to produce plasma in a fusion reaction in 2020, with regular operations beginning in 2027, 11 years behind schedule and over 40 years after the program was first initiated in 1985. But no matter how long or how many tries it takes to get it right, the hope of living in a world powered by this type of energy that we wouldn't need to fight over or pump out of the ground, that we wouldn't need to burn, that wouldn't harm our precious planet, that's probably one of the most optimistic, hopeful ideas I've ever heard, and it's definitely one worth waiting for. China is about halfway done building the largest expressway system in the world, and it's been doing so at a feverish pace over the last 25 years to keep up with the rise of the automobile as the country and the world has shifted away from a rail-based transportation system. The first expressway within the National Trunk Highway System, as it's called, opened in 1988, and today, just 26 years later, the system is over 65,000 miles long. In the 10 years since 2004, the network has tripled in length. Each year, China is now building new expressways equivalent in length to the distance of going coast to coast and back in the United States. The Chinese system exceeded the total length of the US interstate highway system back in 2011. This crazy expansion has happened because the Chinese have embraced the car at a staggering pace. This next mind-blowing fact pretty much sums up this entire video. As the country's middle class boomed and tens of millions of people suddenly could afford to buy cars in the 20 years from 1985 to 2005, the number of passenger vehicles in China increased from 19,000 to 62 million cars on the road. That's a mind-blowing increase of 323,000%. And that 62 million number is more than tripling to 200 million by 2020. That's why we've seen those stories that I thought were a joke the first time I read them, of traffic jams around Beijing stretching over 60 miles and lasting for 11 days. So this project is sorely needed, simply for the country to function. When it's finished, it'll have cut total travel times between cities throughout the country by half on average. Overall, the total cost of building the entire system is $240 billion. That's easily the biggest infrastructure project in human history, with $12 billion a year being invested through 2020. It's being able to afford to do this without adding a national fuel tax, because 95% of the system are toll roads owned by private, for-profit companies. This is a problem, as tolls are expensive at over 10 cents per mile, which is more than the cost of fuel itself. But regardless of how the roads are paid for, or whether you drive in them in your gas or electric car, or ride in a self-driving car in the future, the Chinese economy and quality of life of its people will be significantly better thanks to this ambitious project. It seems the whole country is embracing the Chinese saying, Lutong Kaiton, wealth follows the extension of motorways. India faces one of the most challenging situations in the world. It has 1.2 billion people spread over a vast country, more than 350 million of whom will move into cities in the coming decade, which means some 500 new urban centers will need to be built from scratch. And even though India's sheer size means that its economy ranks third in the world in purchasing power, overall it's relatively poor and underdeveloped. It's also young. The average Indian is just 27 years old, compared to the average American who's a decade older. This means that most of the population is about to hit their prime working years. These are all people who need jobs to be created now. That's why the government is embarking on the largest infrastructure project in Indian history, the $90 billion Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, whose backbone will be a 920-mile-long dedicated freight corridor. Basically, a set of multiple rail lines that will exist solely to move goods from the factories where they are produced to the sea and airports where they can be exported to market. It's designed to cut the logistical costs of manufacturing goods to make India the cheapest place in the world for a company to build its stuff, and, in turn, triple the amount of merchandise it exports from 2010 levels by 2017. Japan is the major partner behind the project because the Japanese economy is based on a technology industry that needs to build its products at the most competitive rates in the world. The overall effort will include a 4,000 megawatt power plant and at least 3 brand new seaports and 6 airports. And all along the route, 24 new cities will spring up, with each aiming to be superior to any existing Indian city in terms of the quality of infrastructure, planning, management, and services offered. With natural resources scarce, and climate change a concern of any good urban planner, the use of technology has been stressed to make sure this boom will be as clean and sustainable as possible. Roads are also a major part of the plan, with thousands of miles of expressways planned to ease congestion. The project is a priority of Prime Minister